come to the right spot. It's another edition of Lewis at Large. 60 minutes of smart talk radio is in your future with guests from all walks of life and all points of view. And now with this week's edition of Lewis at Large, here's your host, Warner Lewis.
Welcome back, everybody, to this segment of Lewis at Large. And, of course, that means more smart talk radio is in your future. And this is certainly no exception. Yours truly, Warner Lewis, of course, from the flight deck, as I am each and every week. And very pleased in this segment to have Martha Zoller. Who's Martha Zoller? You have seen her on CNN. You've seen her on MSNBC. You've also seen her on World News Tonight, the NewsHour, PBS, Today Show, et cetera, et cetera. She's a contributor to Human Events Online, Jewish World Review, Pajamas Media, and numerous other publications, as she is a prolific writer, talker, and observer of the American political scene as well as the world scene. Also has a book that we'll touch on briefly called Indivisible, Uniting Values in a Divided America. We're talking a little bit, going to talk a little bit about the recent death of Hugo Chavez and just what's happening on the American political scene. Martha, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Good. You sound pretty spunky today.
Well, you know what? I'm a morning show person, so I always try to be spunky. But this is getting to the end of my workday, so that's good.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, let's do this. Let's give our Lewis at Large listeners a little bit of background. If they don't know Martha Zoller, tell us a little bit about you and how a little bit about your media career and writing career and what brings you to have such an interest in Hugo Chavez.
Well, it's really, I've been an observer of politics for my whole life. I mean, I was one of those kids where we sat around the dinner table and my father would quiz us on what was happening in the world. And I was very happy, and I've tried to do that with my own children, too. I mean, we were brought up to care about what happened, to read and to study and to have our own opinions. And I think that being the youngest of four children, I was always trying to have something relevant to say. So I think that's sort of where that came from. And I care about what's happening in the world, and I especially care about what's happening in South America because I believe South America is going to be our children's Middle East. If we do not start treating South America differently, and I don't mean coddling them, but I mean doing the great things that democracy does. It is a shame to say that in the speech that John F. Kennedy gave for his inaugural in 1960, where he talked about reaching out to the Americas, and the concern then was communism growing in South America, that we're basically in the same place right now, where communism is growing in South America, and we need to care about South America because it is going to be the Middle East of our children.
What does, with the Chavez death recently and bringing to an end that rule, from where you sit, what's that really mean for us?
Well, I think it's going to be a status quo for the next couple of years anyway. I don't think that President Obama has any interest in really developing, I don't think he has any interest in really developing the kind of relationships that encourage democracy and freedom. It's not that I think he's a bad person. I just think he doesn't care that much about South America. Even though people made a big deal about the meeting he attended where he received the book from Hugo Chavez, really he's done nothing else as it relates to South America, and I don't think it's on his radar. He said himself that Asia is what's important to him, and that developing relationships in Asia, and certainly those Asian relationships are important, whether it's India or China or Korea or any of those places. But also, I think you got to take care of your own backyard before you can start, going to the new neighborhood. And I think we haven't done that for many years. And I think it's going to take a new president that has a focus on South America to be able to make these changes.
In terms of leadership in Venezuela, how do you see that playing itself out?
I think it's pretty clear now that what's going to happen is that the handpicked person by Hugo Chavez is going to be the next president. I think it's pretty clear from all the press reports that are out there. He's got the support of the military, and this is still a bit of a tin-pot dictatorship where if you've got the military, you've got everything. So I think for now what you're going to see is a status quo. okay? And that's really where we're going to see this going. And I don't really know if this guy's better or worse than Hugo Chavez is, because, it's kind of like the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. So we've got to kind of see where this goes. I think we've got to treat them with respect, but also this really tells us, or in my view, why we need to develop more of our own energy resources, why we need to be better competitors, because at the core of all of these foreign policy issues that we have in America is energy independence. If we were energy independent, then these issues would not be as much of a crisis for us to deal with.
As baby boomers, I know we grew up, we feared the Russians, obviously, but also I know that South America was an area that was talked about, and it went away, and it still feels like it's off the national radar screen. Why is that?
I think part of it is that a lot of it is about how journalism covers certain things, and we as journalists have gotten lazy over the years, where while we have so much more information at our fingertips, it makes it almost easier to just go where the easy story is. For example, you're going to laugh about this, but I'm sure there are cruise ship problems every week with some sort of cruise ship. But because we had a major problem with Carnival Cruise Lines a month ago, the big story every week is about some kind of cruise ship problem. So you get this image in your mind that there's all of a sudden problems with cruise ships, okay? And I think media tends to do that. They tend to go in cycles, that if you have a gun violence story, then all of a sudden you're going to have all kinds of gun violence stories. Well, I would argue that back with over 500 people being killed in the Chicago area last year, there was a lot of gun violence stories that should have been covered last year that weren't covered because it wasn't supposedly in the national viewpoint. I think that's what happened to South America. It isn't a foreign assignment the way being assigned to Russia or to Europe or to India. It's south of the border. And so people didn't look at it, or journalists especially didn't look at it as something that they wanted to cover. Plus, it's very, very dangerous. There are certain parts of South America, Venezuela, parts of Colombia, parts of Mexico, where you can't go. It is like, we use the term third world country we overuse it, but they're like third world countries where you cannot travel in those areas, and so it hasn't been covered.
If you just joined us, shame on you. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio. I got a good one going here with Martha Zoller. She is a commentator. She's an author on all things political, domestic and worldwide. Talking a little bit about the death of Hugo Chavez in South America. Kind of drifting off of that a little bit, Martha. Let's bring our sights into the domestic scene. I know you've got some very, very strong opinions, but from where you sit, grade our current political the atmosphere in the country right now, A to F, A being outstanding, F being a disaster.
I think we're probably at a D right now. We were at an F, but I think there's been some movement in the last couple of weeks. I think that the president got some tax increases in January, which was a major give by the Republicans. They don't want to say that because nobody's going to say that out loud, but they gave on tax increases. Then the sequester went into place, and the president did, what some people are calling the Washington Monument strategy, where, you're closing all these things that people care about and not cutting any waste anywhere. And I think it's backfired just a little bit on him, because the president said 2 months ago he wasn't going to meet with Congress, that it was their job to come up with this deal. He wasn't going to meet with Congress. It was their job. Now he spent the last 10 days or so doing meetings with members of Congress. They calling it a charm offensive. I think he saw something in the numbers where people were not believing, especially Americans. I don't know about you, but I've cut my budget 4 or 5 times in the last 5 years personally. I've had to make adjustments all the time, and I didn't start out with the things that were most important to me. I started out with the things that I didn't need. And I think that while you can't run government 100% like a business, because there are certain things government has to do even when they don't have the money, like defend us, certain services, those kinds of things. So you can't do it completely like a business, but I think most people understand that the government could be run a little more like a business than it is run like a business. For example, they found in the most recent GAO report, which is the Government Accounting Office, that there is $50 billion with a B dollars in the Department of Defense of projects that were finished. One of the real benefits of the last 5 years has been construction projects have been coming in under budget. Well, they've just left that money in the budget because they might want to spend it someday. Well, we can't afford that. If the project is finished, it came in under budget, you need to zero those amount of dollars out. And you need to do that in every single department. So I see some movement because they're actually acknowledging that these pots of money are there that don't really, that aren't really necessary. I'm not saying we're going to get what I think. I mean, I'm a radical when it comes to this. I think, I know that if I cut $300 out of my budget today, it's going to roll out $300 a month every single month for the next however long. And at the end of the year or two or three, I've saved a substantial amount of money. I believe we need to make the big cuts now. Now, I'm realistic enough to know that's not going to happen. Paul Ryan's budget is not radical. Balancing in 10 years, I think if you went to a bank and you said, okay, I'm spending more money than I'm taking in, but here is my plan to get to zero. We're not talking about saving any money. We're talking about here is my plan where I'm only spending as much as I'm taking in. 10 years is not radical. It's not radical by anybody's definition except for some Democrats who will say that the deficit isn't that big of a problem and the debt is not that big of a problem. So I see some movement. That's why I've moved up to a D from an F because I see some movement here that's positive.
What about beyond the economic climate here? What about just the general political climate? Were you, first of all, were you surprised by the reelection of Obama? And secondly, what do you credit that to, or discredit that to, and just look towards the landscape of the future? Grade the political landscape without the economy in mind, which is hard to do, but give it an A to an F.
Well, it is hard to do because President Obama, under any other circumstances, would not have been reelected with the kind of economic numbers that he had. But for whatever reason, and I couldn't believe it that if I had seen this exit poll before the election in November, that still 65% of the people in America blamed the economy on President Bush, even after 4 years of President Obama, I would have known that Obama was going to win. Because if he wasn't getting credit for the economy, then nobody was going to hold it against him, right? So he was reelected because there is this perception he's trying, and that's why he was reelected. Granted, you got to give him credit for his ground game because he actually got 8 million less votes than he did in 2008, and he got a lower percentage, which has never happened with a reelected president. Reelected presidents usually always get a bigger percentage except for President Obama, than they got before. So he earned every vote, and I got to give him credit for that. He kept his team in place. He's still doing it. He continued paying them $20 an hour. His focus is like a laser beam on 2014 right now with organizing for action, and he is going to be, fighting hard to win back the House for the final 2 years of his presidency. So I give him all the credit he deserves. If I could sit down and talk to him, even though I'm a partisan and I'm a Republican and I'm a conservative, I could sit across the table from President Obama and say, wow, you really accomplished something amazing. And if you didn't accomplish anything else in your life, the fact you got a re-election with unemployment where it was, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Yeah, it's amazing.
You pulled the rabbit out of the hat.
Shot themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just what happened. They had the great opportunity, and they sat on their hands, and they didn't let the Tea Party and other folks really help them get the message out.
What does the Republican Party need to do to get relevant again in the national election scene?
Well, I think they need to learn from the 30 governors that they have, okay? There are 30 states with Republican governors. There are, I think, right around that same number with Republican legislatures. So clearly, when you're close to home, when you're balancing the budget every year, people trust Republicans with their money, right? Okay, you can see that on the state level. That goes back and forth a little bit, but we've had a majority of Republican governors now for about 25 years. So for a generation, people have trusted Republican governors by and large to run the states. We need to take some of that responsibility and move it into the political, the national realm. And the number one thing you can do, we have got to stop nominating people whose turn it is. President Obama broke to the front of the line. It was not his turn. It was Hillary Clinton's turn if you went by the whose turn it is, right?
Right.
We've got to stop nominating people whose turn it is. And we've got to stop nominating people that are afraid of using conservative media, because what happens is, the guys like Mitt Romney and John McCain, really in their heart of hearts, they want to be liked by ABC, NBC, CBS. It's not going to happen. And if I were advising somebody on that level, I'd say, every time you're in the car, you need to call a local radio show. Every time you're in the car, you need to reach out to some kind of conservative blog. Because there's conservative media out there. It's just balanced in a different way than what the traditional media is.
What about, again, speaking of changes and just politics in general, where you sit, what are the odds of Hillary Clinton running?
Oh, I think very good, and I think her announcement, recently saying that she was going to support now same-sex marriage, they see that as a battleground issue and as a wedge issue, just the way Republicans used it as a wedge issue in 2004 to help President Bush. It has flipped that much in just this period of time, in 10 years' time, basically, to where it's looked at as a radical position to support traditional marriage. And so, and I am a person that supports traditional marriage, but I got to be objective when I look at where the landscape is. You talk to somebody that's under 30, they don't see it that way. And if you talk to somebody, that is under 30, they care about the fiscal issues, they don't care about the social issues. Now, I'm not one of those that say we should abandon social issues in the party. But I think we need to put first things first. And for a person that is 20 to 40, they're concerned about supporting their family in the long run. And I'm a baby boomer, and when I go out and speak to groups, whether I speak to colleges or I speak to senior groups, I apologize the first thing. I said, I'm a baby boomer. We took a country that was making money and ran it into the ground.
Right.
And the people that my parents worked for, my parents had nothing, and they built themselves a really great life. They didn't have a lot of education, but they had a lot of heart, and they worked hard. And my children are 20 to 30 years old, and they all voted Libertarian the last time. Because they're conservative fiscally, but they don't like the Republicans on the social issues. And they grew up in my house where I was talking Republican values all the time. Yeah. And I ran as a Republican last year for Congress. And I lost in the runoff, but I primaried a guy that needed to be primaried, and he had to defend his positions, and I'm proud of what I did.
Well, when you talk about that, and you're talking about younger people, and you're talking about the parties, is it possible, and you were almost making the case for it, is it possible that a third party could be genuinely for real and relevant?
I hope so. But the one thing that Democrats and Republicans agree on is they don't want anybody else at the table. And for the first 150 years of our nation, new parties did emerge. I mean, it started out with the Tories and the Whigs, and then the Republican Democrats came about, and then the Republicans came about, and then the Democrats came in, and there were different emerging of parties all the way through the early 1900s. And then they started putting, the committees in and the primary process and all of this kind of stuff, which makes it very difficult. In my home state of Georgia, I can get on the ballot with no trouble at all if I want to run for president or for United States Senate, which I have no chance of winning as a third-party candidate, right? But in a seat where I could actually win, like maybe city council and that's how you're going to build a party, with city council, a state rep, something like that. The barriers are impossible to get on the ballot. They do that on purpose because they don't want anybody else at the table. I'm a Republican, but I am happy to have everybody at the table where we debate our ideas, because I think our ideas are better, and when we don't get out there and actually debate them, then we do disservice to them, and we end up with what happened last year.
You mentioned somebody needs to break through here, and not necessarily somebody standing in line waiting for the presidential nomination. Who do you see in the Republican Party that might be a breakthrough?
There's a lot of different folks out there that, there are a lot of people right now that are looking in the mirror and seeing presidents look back at them, and that always changes the way you view things. Rand Paul is pretty new on the scene. He's only been in the political scene for 2 years. You got the Marco Rubio possibility. Ted Cruz is a possibility. But I also think there's a whole stable of governors, like Mike Pence, who was just elected governor. And while he's been in the House for a number of years, He's just been elected governor. There's a lot of governors out there, so I don't want to name. I'd love to see some women or Latinos. I do believe that whoever are the nominees over the next, from either party, we're going to have one or two bilingual candidates in this next race. I think that's how much the demographics are going to change, and it's going to become more and more important to be bilingual, and I think that that's something we need to address.
Again, if you just joined us, we're talking to Martha Zoller. She is a commentator, she's an author, speaker, etc. Part of one of Talkers Magazine's Heavy 100 talk show hosts in America. Hey, Martha, you're done running for Congress. What kind of projects you working on right now?
Well, I'm back on the radio. I'm doing a morning radio show that's statewide around Georgia. We're on fairly small stations, and I love that part of it. I love being in the real world that way. And I'm also going to be launching a political blog next month, so stay tuned. Go to marthazoller.com, and we'll be announcing that soon. I'm just staying busy.
You going to, would you consider running in a third party?
I would, but not in 2014. Honestly, it is people do not realize how much it costs you to run for Congress. Not only the money you raise, but the income you lose. So in 2014, I'm going to be making money, and hopefully by 2016, I'll be ready to go again. Okay.
Hey, listen, we've been talking to Martha Zoller, a political commentator. She's an author. She's got her own talk show. I may have you sub here someday. Why not? And,
I'd love it.
Okay. Listen, thank you so much for your time, and would love to talk to you again in the near future.
Great. Thanks so much.
You bet. We'll be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.